Hey there, welcome to the UkeStuff channel and welcome to this full UkeGuide review of this instrument. This is the Diamond Head DU-106 Soprano Ukulele. So what we're going to do in this review is we're going to take a look at a bunch of subjective categories, and we'll talk about the specifications, and then I'll summarize the instrument and give it a UkeGuide rating out of 5 possible ukuleles. If you don't want to watch this whole video, you can skip ahead to parts of the video that matter to you. There should be chapters in the index below. And there's also a summary page inspired by the energy guide rating sheet used in the United States called the UkeGuide, which you can find at ukestuff.info. If you want to support the work here on this channel, there are 3 things you can do. You can like the video, you can subscribe to the channel, and you can always buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ukestuff to say thanks for making this content. I also have some other things available there, such as arrangements of chord melodies, my ukulele method that I use with my students, and some leather picks if you want to check it out. All right, let's begin with the full review here. Subjective categories first. The first one is cost. About $45 on Amazon in the United States right now as this is being filmed. So it's a pretty inexpensive ukulele, and it's going to grab the attention of a lot of people that just want to buy an ukulele and just think, hey, that one's cheap. Or they'll see it in a store and they'll be like, oh, that one's cheap, I'll get that one. Now, in terms of value, I think you're right at the price meeting the value for the instrument. I'd like to see it even a little bit less expensive because, as you'll see, the overall rating of the instrument isn't so great, but probably $45 is fair in today's economy. Now, in terms of build quality, it is a cheap ukulele that is made pretty well. So, with that in mind, it's sort of a mixed bag. Would I buy this instrument for myself? The answer is probably no, but you can do worse with a painted ukulele like this. Now, one of the things we do is we take a look at the inside of the ukulele because sometimes it just gives you an idea of the quality that's put into the instrument as it's built. I recently had a comment from a person that I deleted that just sort of attacked me for looking at the inside of the ukulele and saying it's not fair, but it's completely fair because it's a reality. What it looks like in the inside, even though you may never notice it, does give you a hint at the quality with which it is made. So I use an endoscope here, and I'm going to go feed that through, and we will take a look at the inside of the ukulele here. So let me start the recorder. All right, let's go inside the diamond head here. All right, looking down, you can see that it has a tail block, so you can put in a strap pin. You can see the straight curving that they use. For example, some callus today aren't even using curving anymore on their lower price instruments. You can see that it's, kind of a standard low grade laminate. It's fine. The description on Amazon says that it's maple. I don't know how you could tell. And as we're looking, you can see the bridge plate there on the soundboard, right there. And you can see the screws popping through on the bridge plate, which is fine because the bridge is screwed in. Now let's take a look at the upper bout of the ukulele. Okay, looking at the upper bout, not a whole lot of glue mess here for an inexpensive ukulele. There's some, obviously, right there, but it's not terrible. I've seen far, far, far worse. And it's overall a pretty clean build. The laminate is pretty thick, so thick that you don't really need any horizontal bracing or vertical bracing on the instrument because it's pretty, it's pretty resilient, thick plywood. Probably too much. But nonetheless, it is pretty well made in a sort of traditional sense. So we'll give Diamond Head some credit for that. All right, the next factor is appearance. It's a very plain ukulele. It's a painted ukulele with gloss paint, and it just has a screened-on rosette and a screened-on logo on the top, so it's very plain. In terms of availability, they're available all over the place, Amazon, Diamond Head dealers, so if you want one of these, you can get one. In terms of playability, it's a very standard 35mm nut ukulele, so it's neither more playable or less playable. It's that standard 35mm nut with standard 35mm spacing with a neck shape that is pretty standard, a little bit more narrow than usual, but not by much. So it's a very standard playing experience. The action is a little high. That I would take down a little bit. It's a little bit high on both ends of the ukulele, but it's right middle of the road in terms of playability, particularly for such a inexpensive ukulele. Now, what is a factor here is the sound quality, and I can show it best by just playing the C note, third string open C. It's just sort of a dead, thuddy sound. In the 1 minute review, I said it just less lively, which is a nicer way of saying dead sounding. But there's not a lot of ring. There's not much sizzle or sparkle that you kind of hope for. And one of the characteristics of the soprano sound is this really bright, punchy sound. And you really don't get it unless you hit really, really, really hard. The strings are also not very good. So the sound is towards poor, unfortunately. The volume is not great unless you really hit it, and the tone is dark. So I would try other strings for sure. I would go with a fluorocarbon and see what you get from that. I'm not going to put that on these because this one is going back to our school district and getting restrung and going to be checked out of media centers. That's a little bit of a longer story. We bought new ukuleles for our entire school district last year, and any existing instruments we've been restringing, oiling fretboards, getting them ready to go, doing your standard maintenance work, and then they're being put back into service so that students can check them out, especially students that can't buy their own ukulele. They can check them out from our media centers and practice at home, which is kind of a cool idea and ability for us to do that. So this one is going back and going to be restrung and just touched up a little bit, and then used out of our media centers. So with that, I'm not going to change the strings to a fluorocarbon for that, but if this were my own, I would definitely do that and see if I could get something else out of it. Now, one of the things I do in these reviews is I let you see what I'm hearing, so I use the app Tonal Energy Tuner to let you see what I'm hearing. So I'm going to pull up that app right now, Tonal Energy Tuner, and I'm going to play the C chord into it, C on a GCA instrument, and just let you see what's happening with the harmonics. So here we go. All right, so not a lot of sustain at all, mostly on the lower end of the ukulele, and it disappears very quickly. So the sound is just not great on this instrument. All right, now that we've talked about the subjective categories, let's get into the specifications. It is a soprano scale ukulele with a measured scale length of 13.5625 inches from nut to saddle. There are 12 frets with 12 to the body. It does have side position markers, but they do appear to wear off. So the 7th fret is mostly gone, but there is a side position marker still on 5 and 10 on the side. The body is a traditional double bout. Amazon listing says that it is a maple body and a maple soundboard. I can't verify that. It's painted, so I'm just going to call it laminate maple on the soundboard, laminate maple back and sides. I have no idea what the neck is made of or what the fretboard is made of, as it is a painted fretboard. Same is true with the bridge. It's also painted, so I don't know what the bridge is made of, but it is a tie bar bridge. It is not a radius fretboard, which you would not expect at this price point anyway, and it's a non-compensated plastic saddle and a plastic nut as well. The finish is a gloss paint that seems to have held up pretty well to school use, with one exception of a chip right there on the edge where it probably landed at some point. The overall length is 21 inches, like so many sopranos, and it only weighs 13.2 ounces, is a little bit head heavy or headstock heavy, and I think most of the weight is caught in an overly thick soundboard. I would like to see Diamond Head use a thinner soundboard, and I think that would help the sound as well. The tuners are generic open-geared tuners with pretty large buttons. In fact, the Jawum Smart Tuner that I use to tune ukuleles at school, and I also use on this channel, so there's a standard reference point. The head won't even fit into one side of this, so you have to use one particular side of the tuner to fit that in there. So it's a pretty thick, giant eared button. They could use smaller buttons there. That isn't going to result in a lower rating for me, but they are pretty large buttons there. Now, in terms of action, at the first fret, the strings are 0.75 millimeters above the fret. So that's pretty high. I've seen worse. It would just require a little bit of adjustment, but it is on the high end. And the action at the 12th fret is 2.75 millimeters from the bottom of the string to the top of the fret. And that's also getting on the high side. It's acceptable. So the cool thing is that if you lowered the action at the nut a little bit, which I find to be so much more important for beginning players, because that's where you're playing the strings all the time, it would also lower it at the 12th, and I think that'd be just fine. Now, the nut width is 34.65 millimeters across, which is just pretty much your standard 35 millimeter nut. And then I measure the string spacing between the strings at the first fret. It's 8.74 millimeters, 28.53 millimeters G to A, which is pretty standard 35 millimeter spacing. So if you have really large hands, you're not going to like it. If you have smaller hands or are just used to playing an instrument with tighter spacing, you'll be fine. It's not super tight, it's also not spacious. And then I also check the depth of the neck from the top of the strings to the bottom of the neck at the third fret. It's just a reference point, nothing special about it, just a reference point. And it's 20.71 millimeters from the top of the strings to the bottom of the neck. And that's pretty average. It's actually a little bit less than some, but not by much. You know, generally it's around 21 millimeters on a 35 millimeter nut. So it's pretty standard neck depth, C-shaped neck. And if you're used to import ukuleles from China, that's how most of them are made and imported with that setting. All right, now that we've talked about the specifications, let's go into the summary of the instrument. As I mentioned earlier in this video, we replaced all the ukuleles in our school district. In fact, a lot of schools didn't even have them yet, so we provided ukuleles for those schools. And the existing ukuleles we decided to evaluate and then sort of repackage for use to be checked out of our media centers for those schools that had ukuleles so they could be put to good use. And I'm in the process of doing that for our school district. And that means restringing and cleaning them up, making sure that things aren't broken. We've had to, unfortunately, retire a few ukuleles. In fact, ukuleles from one school were in really bad shape and just wouldn't be worth the time to fix them up. Well, at any rate, as I'm preparing them, when I have a brand that I haven't reviewed, I just bring it home and review it really quick before going through that sort of maintenance process. And this is one of them. So this is the Diamond Head DU-106. It is an okay ukulele. It's built actually pretty well. The action is a little high. The playability is pretty standard. The real only negative here is the sound, I think. And the sound is not great. It's kind of dead. And the only time that you get a bark out of it, like you would a soprano, is when you really hit it too hard. So just based on that alone, I wouldn't recommend it. But I can see why people would buy it because, number one, if they like a painted ukulele. Number two, if they're looking for something cheap. And of course, schools are always looking for a cheap solution because finances are limited. So even though you can get into like a Flight Kids for under $60 each, or you can get into other instruments for not a lot more money, you know, such as the Parapole, the Parapole Classic by Enya. Those are instruments you can get into for just a little bit more money, and the sound is going to be so much better, and the playing experience is going to be so much better. But I can see why schools do what they do, and they buy what they can. The other thing that I haven't mentioned in this review is the only thing that it comes with is a really bad gig bag. This is actually one of the better ones that I saw. Most of them had ripped out on the bottom and just sort of started shredding. So this bag is useless. So you would have to buy your own bag. There are no accessories that come with it. It's kind of disappointing on that level as well. And for $45, you can actually get some painted ukuleles with a similar sound and playing experience for that $45 price point that just doesn't say Diamond Head on it. So overall, it's a functional instrument. The sound isn't great. The playability is pretty standard, but I'm not sure that I would recommend it. So I gave ukuleles a rating between 0 and 5 ukuleles. This one is middle of the road for me, so it's a 2.5 out of 5, mainly because of the sound. Not the playing experience, not the build quality, but the sound. And at some point, the sound matters. Maybe not the first days that you're playing ukulele, but eventually it does matter because you want it to sound good to you as you play it. And there are instruments just slightly more expensive that sound so much better, and that's where I would send you if you were interested. All right, thanks for joining me for this review of the Diamond Head DU-106 Soprano Ukulele. Thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll be back soon with some more Uke stuff for you.